Welcome to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, brought to you by the Fundraising Lab. In each episode, we talk to shift disturbers in the world of philanthropy. These are the folks who are shaking up traditional fundraising practices. On this episode of It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, the Fundraising Lab's Anne LeMessurier talks to David Fu of Nonprofit Videocomms. We hope you enjoy the interview. Here's Anne.
Today we're talking to David Fu from Nonprofit Videocomms, based out of Montreal, Quebec. David is a father, husband, artist, and musician, and has over 20 years working in the nonprofit world. For more than 10 years, David has worked in video creation. So we're really excited to get started and jump in. But just before getting to our interview, I wanted to take a minute and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As someone of settler descent, I'm grateful to be able to live, work, and learn on this land. And so, David, welcome. It's so great to have you here today. Where are you joining us from?
I'm speaking from the traditional territory of the Konokehaga. Island Montreal is known as Tiohtià:ke, traditionally a meeting place for other indigenous nations, including Algonquin people. For my own statement, I take actions towards reconciliation by spending money on First Nations-owned products and services, and continuous education to equip myself to also educate my family, my friends, and peers and clients.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing today, David. So like I mentioned, I'm really excited to talk to you today, and I would love it if you could share with us a little bit about how you got into the nonprofit world.
So that's a very mixed story. I'll try to keep it short. It started with college and needing work. So that started with volunteering at day camp. For many of us in nonprofits that you can probably relate, but volunteering then turns into becoming camp staff and then becoming camp manager and then maybe finding a job at the organization. So through some mix of jumping around in childcare, admin, I really found home working in the nonprofit environment. Specifically social service agencies. So sort of like community mixed services for all ages, all income brackets. There was kind of like an overlap and starting to see a joy in community work and also my other passion, which is art, multimedia. So we're kind of here now, around 20 years later, with video marketing. For nonprofits, but not because of a love for filmmaking, more of identifying a need for sharper, more effective communication.
Oh, very interesting. I wanted to just jump on something you said, which is that your intro to the field was through camp, which was also the same as me. I'm a camp person, and so was Kathy Mann, our president and CEO of the Fundraising Lab, and that was something that we bonded over initially when we first met. So it's nice to know that you're another fellow camp person too.
Isn't that interesting? Camp, it's just like this uniting sort of starting point.
It really seems to be. I think it's that place, like it's a sort of you go through as either a camper or a young staff, and that really gives you sort of the intro to the sector, which is very cool. And so, tell me a little bit more about the transition to video production. So you identified this need, and were you already a filmmaker, or how did that sort of transition happen?
Well, video started more on the musical side. So it started with filming our own band, and then started getting into more of an interest in getting better at it and filming other things. And it kind of grew parallel with working in nonprofit. But when it really finally mixed or overlapped, it started in more of a branding storytelling kind of way, maybe about 10-ish years, it was 10-ish years ago, it was interesting to me and some friends as creatives to tell stories. We all know that that's powerful. It provokes emotion. It can really help you relate with a cause. But I sort of evolved further when I was sort of not seeing an impact I was hoping for. So it was all fine and dandy to to make people to hear feedback that was powerful or that was a great story. But I really wanted, there was kind of a usefulness that I wasn't seeing.
Interesting.
And so I kind of stepped away from filmmaking and trying to figure out cool edits and cinematics, and got into more the foundations of communication.
Very interesting.
So that means more about studying the context people live and work and engage in, the psychology behind the use of different devices, and what I just call trying to show up where people already are. And it turns out that you can do that with less equipment. So my fascination now is not in cinematics, it's in using what you have, which is just the simplicity of smartphone, webcam, and communicating with your face to the people who need you most. And that's where I started really seeing actual driving people towards signing up for something, volunteering for something, donating something.
Oh, that's interesting. I love how you said to use what you have. I mean, one of our principles of the Fundraising Lab has always been to sort of meet our clients where they are, not where we want them to be. And I think that is a parallel that we share. Like, I think, it's what we strive to do is bring resources to small to mid-sized groups that are way more easily available for bigger shops, but to sort of help break them down into pieces that are digestible for folks working in sort of smaller organizations. So it sounds like there's a little bit of a parallel there between our work.
Yes, for sure.
And so maybe you can tell us about your company, Nonprofit Video Comms. And so what types of videos are you making? I mean, you just talked about sort of seeing this need for videos that actually inspire action. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about the work you do.
I'll try to say it in two parts. The first one is that originally it's really about the basics. So I think every organization needs a clear intro video. And this intro video exists in more places than just your website. The other set of basics is a video about what you do, a video about how you do it, a video about who this is for, a video about how much it costs, or how do you donate. So all of the essential questions that strangers or visitors to your service probably want to know. Just the bare minimum essentials, which I think for most websites don't seem to address.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The other part of it is video content. So more of the daily or weekly stuff on newsletters and social media. Videos that instead of nonprofits trying to entertain or talk about themselves, videos that empathize and try to make audiences feel heard. So that's daily or weekly content about, are you struggling with XYZ? Here are 3 tips. Are you looking for a place to volunteer or donate, but you don't understand your strengths? Consider these 3 tips instead of just, we do this and we do that, and, clever, cute, or entertaining things that aren't really helpful. So it's kind of your essentials is one part of it, and then your daily video content, your video ecosystem that sort of leads people to your organization.
And at your organization, do you spend a lot of time building or creating those foundational pieces as well as the sort of more ongoing content, or how do you normally operate?
Well, at the moment, that's a system I'm trying to build. It's only been a couple of years of trying to preach, use what you have, and to explore and sort of cement the basics. So an intro video and daily, weekly video content.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm learning is that I don't have sort of like a rinse and repeat system yet. What there seems to be a lot of is kind of one-on-one or group coaching. This didn't happen on purpose. I'm finding that the biggest barrier is less technical now and more how to even come up with the topics at all.
Right.
On top of general nervousness about speaking, something about turning on the camera makes people suddenly go through like 3 gates of filtration in their mind. So the process right now seems to be, now that I've gotten rid of the technical difficulty of cinema and we're just using Zoom or smartphones, the next thing is how to just coach through the speaking part.
I mean, what I feel like I'm hearing all the time is that when it comes to social media, is that video content is king or queen or top. It's the best, it's the most important, and that it's so engaging on social media, like the algorithms favor video. Yeah, like what would be one of the first steps that you would say to someone who's never created a video for their more regular content?
So the things that you're talking about really are commonly like a big package of thoughts and ideas and beliefs that people come to me with. How long, how often, how do I build visibility? How do I post this and that? I think that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. Is that the expression?
I think so, yeah.
Let it all go, let it go, let it go, let it go. Because sometimes we set up all those systems, and then when we finally turn on the camera, we don't know what to say. So I think the very, 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 very first thing has to be, what is a problem you're trying to solve for one person? Is it maybe for this year's strategic comms plan? Is it that we're trying to get more donors? Is it that we're trying to get a team of volunteers to do a particular thing? Is it to promote to more referral partners and agencies? We got to find one. I know you typically have 10, but just pick one and let's make a video for that. And then see what happens. It's just you with maybe a template or a script of how to address a particular need of that person. Well, we'll call it partner agencies. We want to make a video to introduce ourselves to partner agencies. We'll use a smartphone. And then without explaining further, we take that video and we just use it. And all we're expecting is a bit of feedback. Did they open the video? Did they watch the video? What did they say about the video? And then from there, you sort of build a little bit of a reward. You're like, okay, that worked. Okay, somebody got an insight or a preview of our organization and wanted to talk further. Now we build from there. Maybe that leads to, we're good, we're fine, we're just going to keep on using this video. Unleash it. Or maybe it builds to, oh, they had other questions. Let's make more videos about that. So it's like, just dial it all back, let it all go and solve one problem with one simple video and observe and try to repeat.
So there's also another parallel between our work, I think, which is another one of our sort of mottos is like, nothing teaches you how to fundraise like fundraising, just going out and doing it. And I think that that's kind of what you're saying. Nothing will teach you how to sort of grow those video muscles better than just going ahead and creating.
Yep. That's exactly the same as my approach and probably every other kind of tool that we want to use.
Very cool. And so I want to talk a little bit about something you touched upon about the different sort of purposes of videos. For example, if you're creating a video to provide information to service users or clients versus using a video for a fundraising appeal or in your donor communications. And how would you sort of can you identify key differences between those, or how would it be in the way that video is distributed? I'm wondering if there's some identifying factors that are very different between a video for clients and a video for donors, or if it's in the use of the video itself.
Okay, I'm pretty certain about this model that I've come up with, which is how to determine which videos for which purposes and which audiences. There's kind of a spectrum that I like to talk about, which is on one end, there's more cold audiences, people who don't know about you, and you kind of have to reach the general public. And then there's videos over on the other end of the spectrum, which I call function videos. These videos are supposed to perform some kind of task that increases an operation or a function at your work. They're boring, they're unsexy, they're not entertaining at all, but they're 100% useful. And so somewhere inside of that spectrum, on the public end, the cold audiences, the total strangers, is kind of more entertaining, more short, and more. It could be infotainment, educating people. And it requires a bigger investment of testing, nurturing, maintaining, repeating, changing titles every week.
Okay.
And then more towards the functional side is maybe private proposal videos. You use this specifically for a certain level of partner or for a certain level of funder. And it explains in just sort of numbers, facts and numbers, addressing what the funder might want or need and stuff. So these are not public, these are private. Those could be as long as you want or as short as you want. It just has to answer the question. But since the audience is already in your community, in your network, doing work with you, this video is useful. And if you have, say, sort of 10 proposals to make, you use the same video for those 10. This is the part where it performs sort of a multiplication function or a leveraging function. You're seeing people do it all the time with Loom, with, Soapbox and things like that. Video messaging, this is part of the whole functional side. And then somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of public stuff and functional stuff, a lot of nonprofits are already succeeding well with this, which is things like webinar, which is things like video podcasting, like right now. We're using a video to do one event and speak to many. And we're using our face, we're using our body. Did that kind of answer you? I feel like I went on a rant.
No, I really like the way that you categorize that. So you have on one end, it's really it's almost like a funnel in a sort of a funnel. It's kind of like you have your videos that introduce people to the cause and your mission. And then you have in the middle, there's kind of like this, it's your audience knows a little bit about you, but you can speak to many people at one time. And then on the really personal side, that's when you can get specific. And it's not that video has to always be personalized for that particular funder or person potentially. It's that you can use that video in a more personal way.
Yeah, an excellent example, and this is from like the 1970s, is training videos. Especially during the pandemic, we have a lot of virtual volunteers now across different time zones. That's a perfect opportunity to record your screen doing your Google Doc management systems and then send that video to all the volunteers.
Yeah. I love that. It's funny how things can come back, like training videos from the 70s are now more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
The Fundraising Lab believes in building community, a community that helps each other. Because being in a small to mid-sized shop can be somewhat isolating. This is why we've made the Spark community free. But don't believe us. Listen to some of our existing members. Here's what Maureen had to say. It's a great way to have peer support and another fundraiser to bounce ideas off of. It's especially important as I'm the one and only fundraiser at my organization. And Deb. As a newish fundraiser, I joined to get up-to-the-minute advice and to network. This group is my go-to resource. Keep this group going. It's an amazing platform. So what better way to grow your network than to join a community? And yes, it's free. Sign up now at fundraisinglab.com/spark.
So I wanted to know what you see as some of the biggest challenges that organizations face when just starting out to incorporate video communications particularly into their fundraising, into their donor comms.
The biggest challenge that I'm seeing on my side, which tends to be small organizations between teams of 2 up to about 15, 20, is that it's all those questions you brought up at the beginning. That seems to be a big barrier. There's a lot of information out there that makes recommendations on how to get started. And they tend to come to me with all of that already sort of on their plate. And they need someone to sort it out. They're like, okay, well, what technology do we need? What cameras do we need? What this and that? So I think the biggest barrier seems to be, I don't know how to put this concisely, pre-beliefs, misconceptions about how to get started, which leads to they saw all these recommendations and started to research the costs. And so they've put into their next proposal or fund application, we need $5,000, we need $15,000 or whatever dollars to make this video. And I don't know how to solve this part. They were never told earlier in the process how unnecessary it all was. But that seems to be the first barrier, is beliefs and misconceptions, and possibly already having done a bunch of research to figure out the costs. And I might throw in a second barrier there, that is the moment you turn on the cameras, suddenly everyone freezes up.
Right.
But I think that's where I come in.
I think in addition to cost, time is definitely something that is limited on the part of a lot of the organizations and people working for the organizations that we know. How do you overcome that barrier when you're starting out? The barrier of just, I don't have enough time to get through my sort of regular to-do list. Like, how can I add this on in a meaningful and intentional way that's going to make a difference?
Now that I can confirm, and I know that technology can kind of just be like set aside, that's a big sort of a burden off of a marketing team's shoulders, especially for time, because a lot of people will sort of allocate time for learning and editing software, learning a particular camera, and then they're going to quadruple that time. That'll be the big surprise in the end. A hard drive failure, your internet's down, too many opinions in the edit. I always recommend, now that we just want authentic video, the focus needs to be on practicing speaking and recording it in one shot.
And then posting it without editing, or how would you go about it?
Exactly. So if you want to talk about time savings, you could easily get sucked into a vortex or a rabbit hole of editing and filming for, let's just call it 10 hours. Or we could get rid of the need for editing and professional filming and spend 10 hours on practicing speaking and practicing writing. And that pays off because now you can just film quickly, look it over and post it. But also now you and maybe your teammates are better spoken in presentations, better spoken in meetings, better spoken at conferences and networking. You've become sharper writers. And then there's repurposing those videos. Now you can chop them all up into more content. So the upfront investment in practicing getting it right so that you don't have to edit pays off in other ways. Whereas if you spend 10 hours learning how to edit, now you're just kind of only invested in that one skill and it doesn't do much else.
And there's so much overlap too between sort of what fundraisers sometimes need to be able to do, which is to write well, to speak in front of crowds, so I like that perspective. That's interesting. I'd never thought about video like that. So thank you. That's very cool. You know, I have always been like a huge fan of documentaries, and I see a lot of similarities also between some of the principles of documentary films and fundraising. And I firmly believe that like videos can inspire people to better understand causes and sort of take action on social justice issues, social change things, kind of like you mentioned before. But I wonder what needs to be in place at an organization for a video to be successful at getting a donor to actually go out and make that donation or to reach out to them to learn more. Like, how does that video inspire action? Or I guess what other things need to support it?
I think we need to talk a little bit more about the inner working of storytelling. So I'll get to the answer, but I'll start with, when you're watching a documentary, you're in one context, you several contexts. Maybe you heard about it in an ad or from a friend, and then you rented it, purchased it, went to Netflix or went to the movie theater or went to a friend's house. So you're already on some kind of journey, and the context of this documentary is mainly entertainment. You've seeked it out for some reason that you needed, and then you went to it, and then now you're taking it in as entertainment. You're a captive audience. You are here and ready to invest in the time. The reason those principles don't apply necessarily to videos online and to prompt donor action, because the whole journey and the context is different. So it might be the same content, stories about the good things and the bad things happening in a particular city or town, successes of volunteers, or online we have that spectrum again, the public audience, the strangers, and then the people who do know you. And so the strangers don't tend to come to ads and commercials ready and captive and willing to spend time to take in a documentary or stories. So you have to meet them differently, with a snippet or with something really, controversial or something really juicy. Now, that's just one segment of your audience. If you start going into the warmer or the hot audience where people maybe know you or people totally know you, that positioning is different to prompt them towards donating and volunteering. And that requires research and understanding where they are in your relationship. So where they are is maybe they tend to come back to your website. I don't know why. Maybe they're a volunteer, or maybe they're a partner company and their staff is a partner of your organization, and they come to your website to get information about some questions they have. So now they're in a position to be slightly more captive. And you only know that through research about your audience's needs and traffic. That's when you know that you can have a video on that particular page of a particular website that can get into it a little bit more deeply, with stories that person needs to hear, with instructions that person needs to hear, and then a web page sort of designed to help them move to the next thing. So the similarity of watching a documentary is simply to serve where they are at the moment, but the difference is the journeys.
I like that. And I think that in terms of like, if let's say we're in the warmer audience now and we have a video on a website or on a landing page, what sort of things do you need to have it designed so like at the end of the video, it's a very clear call to action, make a donation now? Or do you make that a little bit less explicit, or how would you recommend organizations do it, or is it more of a case by case basis?
I think it's case by case because every organization has different audience sort of psychographics and needs and contexts. For example, an organization that serves asylum seekers has to, in their research, they might find out that they tend to be mobile users. They tend not to right away work or communicate in English. So that changes things.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they're coming from a different culture, calls to action might have be perceived differently.
Interesting.
So that's why I can't make a blanket recommendation, but I can make a blanket sort of a starting point, which is there's a difference between calls to action for a cold audience versus a call to action for a warm and hot audience. And it's up to the organization to listen and survey and interview and study what those patterns are.
You're absolutely right. You can't sort of have a blanket action that's always going to result in exactly what you want it to have based on a whole host of things, like you said. So I think that maybe the takeaway is to kind of go back to your own organization and the purpose of the video that you're using and where you're placing it. And one thing that I've seen with our clients sometimes is that videos can sometimes turn from a tactic that's used as part of a broader strategy to the strategy itself. And in fundraising, I see videos as a tool, like it's a tactic. Whereas I've heard countless times where there's an organization that's really excited about a particular campaign they're launching, and the entire campaign strategy really is around a video or a series of videos. And I guess, have you ever seen this happen, and how should videos be? Like, what should they be? Should they be a tool, or should they be a strategy, or are they?
When you paint that picture, are you saying that it started as a tool, then became a strategy sort of like out of excitement, and then they started really adopting video? Or are you saying that it kind of accidentally morphed into it out of overexcitement or something? Like what's the context?
I think it's sort of getting excited about everything we were talking about earlier about how being told that video is king. It's sort of really important to be using, but not always having sort of other things in place, like the calls to action that direct you to the website or follow up or things like that. And I think that's kind of where I was wondering if you ever see that, or how you might recommend organizations overcome that.
I've seen two different outcomes, which is, getting excited and starting to morph into doing more video or relying on it. And then the opposite, which is like, well, this isn't working. The energy is kind of fizzling out and we're losing faith, feeling burned. But to address the excitement, I've seen it happen, and I've seen a couple of interesting situations. One of them is that because an organization has, one of their strengths is to pivot and to notice patterns that are successful and repeatable, to kind of like grab onto that and go for it, because it's digital marketing and you're a small nonprofit. You should be allowed. You should allow yourself this flexibility.
I like that. Yes.
A lot of us, I think, come from maybe I don't want to cast judgment here, but are a little bit more stubborn about processes and best practices. So I don't think right now, especially with the wide world of the internet, that that kind of structured attitude is helpful. And then the other interesting situation is an excitement that is kind of has bad reasoning. So it's like, okay, the videos are getting us a lot of likes. We're getting that dopamine hit of like, ooh, people like it. Oh, the process was fun to make. Oh, we've discovered a new creative outlet. I support all of that stuff if you're forgetting the problem you were supposed to be solving in the beginning. Now you're just spending a lot of money. And when I say money, I mean wages. You're spending a lot of wages and hours on chasing fun. I just want to say again, I'm not against fun.
I don't get that vibe that you're against fun.
It's got to be functional fun. It's got to do some work for you.
I love it. That's great. Yeah, I'm with you. And I think through your answers, it's kind of answered the question I was thinking of, which is that videos really are supporting a strategy. Like, that question is the strategy. And I think that that's kind of going back, always coming back to that and reviewing it too, because I agree. I definitely want to encourage experimentation. I mean, that's why we're the fundraising lab. Like, it's about trying new things and not always getting so caught up in in sort of, yeah, the rules and learning the rules and breaking them, I guess. But at the same time, you can end up spending a lot of time on an editing program or in finding like the perfect music to set to the video that you're creating. So I think coming back to the purpose of why you're doing this is important.
I always have in the back of my mind, and I try to tell this to clients, is that you always have to check back. And I think it's the same for any other communication tactic. You have to keep checking back to that goal. For me, that goal is this content helpful? And how do I know? I need proof. Even if it's one person, I need that proof, that little data point, that just so that we don't get out of hand. Keep going back to that one goal and back check it.
So I'm a very data oriented person. I mean, with my work at the fundraising lab, that's usually how I'm helping our clients on the data management side. And I wonder what kind of data points should you be looking for? Like if you're sending your video out, what, I guess, yeah, maybe just a blanket, what should you be searching for and measuring?
This is the part where I start to sound like I'm recommending like caveman tactics, but this only applies to small nonprofits.
Okay.
The larger nonprofits have the freedom and flexibility of deep, rich CRM data, attribution, tracking, all of that stuff. A small nonprofit tends not to, so this is for them. The most successful tracking, measurement, and data that I have found, and I'm telling you, it's going to be embarrassing, just using a spreadsheet or notepads or post-it notes right beside your computer. And the reason is this: the temptation to use metrics on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, to use those metrics of likes, follows, views, and shares. They're only useful at sort of a massive level for a larger organization. If you can make a correlation between 300 likes and maybe a number of donations, you can only very imprecisely make a correlation, not like a solid link or a cause. So for a smaller organization, we can't rely on things like likes, views, and comments and shares, because it's the equivalent of I made this analogy the other day on LinkedIn of fish just sniffing at the bait on a hook on a fishing rod, and then we've collectively started to kind of agree that this is meaningful data. Oh, so we've 30 sniffs on our video post. Therefore, we've raised awareness this year, and we can report that to a funder. But I suggest that you have to pay attention, and you have to embed this in every staff and teammates communication, is to take notes and listen. And it can just be a checklist. It could just be a bullet point. When a client comes in and says, I'd like to register for such and such, you just got to build it into your conversation. Oh, how'd you end up here? How'd you find us? And it's amazing, the answers you receive and all the weird. So I used to work in an organization where we did this, but we kind of didn't do anything with that information. It kind of just filled some boxes. Oh, pamphlet. Oh, commercial. Oh, poster. But what I'm really interested in is how do you get the information and repeat it? So if someone comes in and registers for a dance class, and then you say, oh, so you're new here, how did you find out about us? And they say, well, my friend was telling me about you. And they're like, oh, your friend, what did they send you something? Do they attend a class here? It only takes 30 seconds to kind of just dig a little bit deeper. And if they say, I saw a video, here's an example, applying for a job. I saw a video where the CEO was having a conversation, and I really felt like I could work there. I saw a video where of your workshop, and I saw other people like me. That's when I knew I should give this a shot. Or I was always shy about this thing, but your Zoom recording kind of showed what kind of people are there, so this helped me sign up. Or I heard the other day in a meeting, someone I was talking to said, when I see a video speaking in my language, that's when I know this is the place for me. I'm allowed to call. I am going to get the help I need. Those are the notes that Facebook metrics don't give you. And if you're a small organization, you only need 3 or 4 or 5 little data points that you wrote by hand to know which video to make next, or which video to use deeper and further. And the reason this sounds cavemanish is because I think we're tempted to use the tools that are just given to us for free and mistake them as meaningful data.
Speaking of data, on March 29th, we are launching our brand new database course with resident expert Anne LeMessurier. In this course, Anne answers some of the most asked about questions from our clients here at the Fundraising Lab, such as why a donor database, quantitative versus qualitative data, donor versus donation data, and fundraising data. This is the first of 4 courses each year through Spark Premium. You can gain access to all of this and more through Spark Premium. Join today at thefundraisinglab.ca/spark.
We kind of have to go backwards in time and just do it ourselves, especially as small nonprofits. Do it by hand, do it on a spreadsheet, make columns. Who was the person? Next column. Which video did they talk about? Next column. What did they say about it, or how did they interact with you? What's their relationship with you? Next column, a note to yourself about that, the good thing or the bad thing about that video. And the other thing about this is you could have, I'm sorry, this answer is way too long.
No, I'm loving it. It's great.
You could have 3, 4, or 5, or 10 data points that show a complete journey from seeing a video to registering to your program or donating, and demonstrate the return on that video, the time spent making the video to what you got in return at the end for future funding applications. I would rather say we got 5 or 10 new donors of this much money, or registrations of this small workshop or class. Can we have more money to do more of this?
Right.
Or can we have the same amount of money to do it again? Instead of saying we raised views and likes by 15% and raised more awareness. And then you get that funder kind of going, yeah, okay, I've heard that's a thing, but I don't really fully understand it. Now you're kind of gambling of whether you're going to get that money next year.
Right. No, I think, and it goes back to the sort of strategy behind the video. Like, instead of looking at engagement, or I love how your analogy of sort of the fish sniffing the bait. If you have, let's say you have your foundational video, maybe it's the intro to the organization, and you've posted that once or twice on a couple of different social media platforms over the course of a couple of months, and you can total all those engagement stats, but in reality, that's not really giving you anything super meaningful, other than the fact that you posted a video a couple of times on a social media platform, and that was the response of the audience at that given time. It's not really going back to the answer to the question, which is like, we wanted this video to answer a question about our program, or we wanted the video to answer a question or answer sort of a question for a donor, or inspire them to act. Going a little bit back to basics and kind of filtering out a bit of the noise that's generated from every social media platform and their different measurements of the way that they operate.
Yeah. Do you mind if I offer 2 examples of this?
No, I'd love examples. That would be great.
Okay. So the first one is, I went to a talk by the then branding person at, the store Ardennes.
Yeah.
In the mall.
Sort of accessories and things.
Yeah.
Like that.
And they were talking about their latest campaign to kind of refresh their brand and appeal to diverse youth. And they told me, I don't remember the amount of money, but it was in the millions on social media. And she was talking about how hard it was to make that case to such a sort of a sales-driven department. So that's sort of the sales department, which in our case is fundraising. And then when they finally got the data, what they called a successful branding campaign on social media, she said her job is to make those cases that this much social media activity equaled this much sales. And she says it's nearly impossible to make. So she has to she only feels it in her gut that there's a correlation, but the difficulty, and tech companies are always trying to solve this. How do you make that link? And the larger organizations can do it through attribution and tracking, but the small organizations don't. So this is why I say small organizations should not rely on all these.
What it made me think about too is that if they're like Ardennes is spending however many millions on their social media, that's also what small charities are competing against for their sort of cold audience's attention too. So I think that's worth in this whole scheme of things.
Sorry, I remember the example now. I don't know which giant corporate store this is, but it was just some little business advice that they don't the number one thing they rely on is talking to customers. So that is actually like the managers and the owners walking around the store and just asking them, do you like
Right.
this? How are you using that? What can we do
Mhm.
better? How did you hear about us? And just being in it. And so that's kind of like the getting back to basics part I'm talking about, is keep a
Mhm.
notepad and train your team or yourself or your staff to have those conversations, and which should inform the videos that you make.
It was amazing to have David on the podcast today. For more from David, follow him on LinkedIn for daily updates. If you found the podcast useful, we'd love if you'd rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. You can find this and many other free resources on the Fundraising Lab's website and social media. The music you heard on this podcast was Dog Days by Isaac Joel. And like Mama always said, it doesn't hurt to ask.